Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA North week number 3 overview and analysis video, the final week of the pick and play format. I'm very excited to finally be done with this format. I think that there are some positives in terms of teams, getting a chance to play off against theoretically teams that are around them in terms of their style, but I'm excited to get into playoffs. I know you guys are as well. These best ofs really need to start kicking into gear. I need to see some relevant matches in North America, and we will get that after this week. Of course, this determines seeding going into the playoffs. For the most part, we really have most of it decided already, at least in terms of who is making top 4 and who is in bottom 4 to kind of decide who gets that extra life, if you will, and automatically gets into a qualification series, but there's still a lot to be determined. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from this week, and did it live up to your expectations? Were you shocked by any of the outcomes, or did you kind of see everything coming? Always curious to know your thoughts and opinions down there. But without further ado, let's get into things. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. I would typically say that we're updating my power rankings at the end of this video, but we will not be doing that. We will be looking and touching upon the bracket that will be formed at the end of this video, going into the domestic playoffs at the very least for the LTA North, not necessarily the full playoffs with the LTA South that qualifies for Worlds, but certainly something to think about for these teams. I'll be touching upon who I think will do well, who I think is set up in a pretty good spot, and just general expectations, but that will be saved for the end of the video. Most of today, as per usual, will be spent talking about the games themselves. So let's kick it off with day number 1. Our first day had one of the more interesting matchups on paper for me, because I think at the beginning of the split, if you had told me this was a really important one for qualification, I would have believed you. Obviously, it turned out not to be. It's a matchup between the winless 100 Thieves and the undefeated Shopify Rebellion, and Shopify is able to come out on top in a game 3. They are able to pick up the 2-1 series win. They moved to 3-0. 100 Thieves moved to 0-3, and everything kind of is going right for Shopify, and everything is kind of going wrong for 100 Thieves. It's actually insane just how binary it's been for both of these teams. First and foremost, there's been a roster change. Sniper, at the very least in the short term, is out, and Dokla, one of the coaches they brought on at the beginning of the split, is back in. Dokla, we know, is obviously in playing form. He was supposed to be playing for Nightmare this upcoming split, or I guess his previous split, but Nightmare had everything happen to them at the beginning of the year, so it didn't end up working out like that. But Dokla, definitely a player that I think can still function at the tier 1 level. Obviously a former champion here in North America with NRG, and former teammates on the other side, Contracts and Palafox. I'm sure he's pretty happy to go into them, and unfortunately it just didn't work out for him. Top lane has kind of been a nightmare role for 100 Thieves throughout the last year and a half, and that very much continued in this series. But positively for Shopify on the other side, talking about some of the things they actually did well, you got to start with Palafox in the mid lane, who I thought had an excellent game here. He's going to get player of the series overall. I thought both of their wins, the Yone and especially the Victor in game 3, were absolutely massive. And if you wanted to give it to Contracts for the setup work, that's what the broadcast did, and I totally understand it. I think the Maokai, the Trundle, both of them were very good, but I really do believe that Palafox was the most impactful player throughout this series, and I think the damage that he was able to output as consistently as he was able to output it is really what ended up making the difference. Look at the draft in game number 1, the only game that Shopify ends up losing in this series. They put a lot more pressure on their side lanes, on Gwen, on Corki, to be able to carry the game with Xin Zhao and Annie as mostly setup. The moment Palafox starts getting the keys to be a lot more aggressive and kind of be the main carry of the team, that's when things got a little bit easier. Now, I'm not saying that that's always going to be the case. Palafox is certainly a more inconsistent player, but I have to remind people, Damonte is still on board with this team as one of their primary coaches at the moment, and Damonte was always very good at being able to adapt to the meta in the mid lane, and so I do believe that Palafox has probably upgraded. Obviously, the vibes on this team are way better with Damonte in here, but I think mid lane in particular is a lane that I'm watching out for in a positive way for Shopify, just to see if it can continue to be, a really big plus for them, and Victor and Palafox in general were really, really great in this series. Like I said, Contracts was probably the best facilitator you could ask for. This was a River-esque series from Contracts, or at least like a Golden Guardians Prime River-esque series from Contracts. Really great stuff on the Maokai, on the Trundle. He's always at his best when he's on these facilitative tanks. I know that feels a bit counterintuitive, because this was the guy who was getting, clowned on for a lot of his career for leading the league in deaths every year despite being a productive player, but That's because he plays tanks and goes in all the time. When you're watching these inconsistent games, it's because he's playing carries, and oftentimes teams aren't really set up for Contracts to be a primary carry. He can do it. He has the mechanics, certainly, to do it. But again, his sweet spot is Maokai, it's Trundle, it's Ivern. It's a lot of those more supportive, facilitative picks to allow the rest of his team to do well, and I think that was really put on display in the back half of this series where he was a tremendous facilitator. I think if you wanted to give him player of the game for game 2, that is entirely understandable. That Maokai game was absolutely ginormous from him. People are clowning on Fudge, rightfully so, because I think the guy genuinely forgot he could get stacks on Cho'Gath. He did say that in a post-game interview. I can't really tell if he was joking or not. He's a very sarcastic guy, so sometimes it's hard to pick up on, the nuances of that. But if he was joking, that's funny. If he wasn't joking, that's even funnier. So whatever it ends up being, he had like 9 stacks at 30 minutes in the game on Cho'Gath and still ended up winning, Pog. Like, that's very funny overall. Fudge wasn't particularly useful, but he was better than Dokla, I will say that. And then B-Boy and Seos continued to be really solid. B-Boy's having a really nice bounce back split. I've continued to kind of push back on the B-Boy hype. At some point, I'm going to have to acknowledge that he's just genuinely playing well right now. So credit to Shopify. And then for 100 Thieves, this team has completely fallen apart, and it's with some of their players still playing relatively well. Quid is a good player, and he's trying his best to win a lot of these games for 100 Thieves. It's just not happening right now in terms of how things are going. And that's got to be incredibly frustrating for him and for the team in general. When you have one of the most talented and one of the best players in the entire league and you just can't seem to pick up a win, like, obviously you're going to start to get at least a little bit tilted from a scenario like that, and that just seems to be the case. Top lane has been a huge problem for 100 Thieves. Sniper ends up getting benched. From what we hear, is a confidence thing. He just doesn't trust himself to play the game right now. He needs to get his own feet under him again, outside of the game before he ends up coming back onto stage. And in the meantime, Dokla is going to be filling in, but Dokla didn't play well in this series. He's dud of the series for me. I thought he was completely outplayed in multiple of these games. He was the only player in game 1 that I felt was kind of lagging behind, and in games 2 and 3 didn't really offer anything. I think it's pretty reasonable to give dud of the series to FBI or Ayla as well, because I think both of them were also pretty terrible, and I think if you look at their individual effects, it's just clear that Shopify is the better bot lane, which is not something that you would have even come close to saying at the beginning of the year with how FBI was playing coming back to this 100 Thieves team. But again, everything is just falling apart for 100 Thieves. The only thing that saved FBI and Ayla was how good Yunara was in game number 1, the first Yunara I believe that we've seen in the LTA North. I could be wrong about that. I can't even remember at this point. It's been out for so long in the LPL and the NACL and even the LCK that it's kind of difficult to recall and remember if it's been played in North America before. Either way, really nice win here for Shopify. 100 Thieves just didn't have the firepower to keep up. It doesn't matter how good Quid is in the mid lane. It feels like everything else is falling apart, and 100 Thieves are genuinely one of the worst teams in the entire league. And for Shopify, like I said, nice victory, but mostly it's just a confidence reassuring victory. The fact that you can just be better than a team like 100 Thieves that I think on paper, should be better than you from a talent perspective. It's a really good sign. It feels like everything is starting to come together for Shopify. While I do think this undefeated record is pretty fraudulent, they didn't necessarily play any good teams throughout the regular season, I still do think they are likely top 3 or top 4 at bare minimum, and that's already a huge plus for what we expected from them. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and this one was a banger despite being a 2-0. It was LYON taking on FlyQuest, and Fly is, like I said, going to pick up the 2-0 win, but this was close. This was very, very close, and honestly, it feels so bad for LYON that they're not able to pick up a single game in this series. Saint played out of his mind, and we'll talk about that in just a second. I think that there is some things that I just kind of want to dispute. You guys probably already know where I'm going to go with it if you've watched the channel for any period of time. There are some things that I want to, say in positive to Saint, and things I want to say that are just not exactly the same opinion as everybody else in the community, and all of it will come together, and I'm sure people will either be mad or agree with me, and there will be no middle ground in terms of how it goes. But we'll talk about Fly first and foremost because they are the team that ended up winning. Player of the series was honestly kind of tough for this one as a whole, because I think you're looking at a team that generally just played well as a unit. You're not necessarily looking at one player carrying over the other. The only player that I don't think you could even reasonably give it to was Quad in the mid lane, who continues to be the weak link of this FlyQuest roster. All due respect, I think Quad is fine enough domestically. I think he is, a top 3-ish mid laner domestically, although maybe that is up for debate with him getting kind of slaughtered by Saint in this matchup. Maybe he's not like top 3 or top 4 right now. I think that's also a potential conversation with how, jam-packed that role is, but I do think everybody else on this team ended up just being so much better than their opposition that it almost didn't end up mattering. Bwipo got it on broadcast. I kind of agree with that. I think the Scion was a really influential pick in game number 2, and so he is going to be the one who ends up getting player of the series for me. A lot of positive plays coming in from Bwipo. Was excited to see Surdy get another chance here. I know poor Zamudo has been essentially relegated back down to the LRN. It's crazy that he started the year in a better position than what he's going to end the year after being the MVP in Tier 2, but it just kind of is what it is. It's clear that LYON wants to end out the year with Surdy in the top lane. Not that I necessarily disagree with that move. It's just unfortunate that Zamudo was kind of the casualty of that, at least for the moment. Now, maybe that changes. Maybe Zamudo ends up getting the call up after he gets his visa. I don't know. I know on Leaguepedia it says that he's been assigned to LYON's LRN team, their tier 2 team. So, it is what it is, right? Like, you just have to kind of deal with that. But I was excited to, at the very least, get another look at Surdy here. It didn't quite go his way. Top lane was very much in favor of FlyQuest here, but this is how it went, early on in the split as well. Bwipo was the first person to really take advantage of Surdy in winter, so it's not particularly shocking to see him do so again in the summer split here. He's just a really good player at being able to capitalize on mistakes, and Surdy makes quite a few of those in terms of his game plan. The Scion in particular was really phenomenal in game number 2, but I don't want to take anything away from the rest of this team. Inspired, I thought, had a really great series. I honestly am kind of shocked he's not getting nearly as much credit as I would give him for how well he played. I think a lot of people are just kind of underselling the impact that a player like Inspired has on the game and had on the game in this series. I think Busio and Masu were really good in the bot lane. Busio in particular was definitely better than his opposition. Not that that should be surprising. Lions has really struggled in the LTA, and Busio has arguably been the most productive player the entirety of the year up until this point in any position. So it really doesn't shock you that, or it shouldn't shock you that Busio played so well. Masu, I think, was really good. I think you can look at Henna being relevant, I guess. I think that's a generous way to put it, but relevant for LYON on the other side. But Masu was still significantly better, even if he had significantly more chances. Again, the only real thing that you can say that's negative towards FlyQuest is that Quad kind of got slammed in the 1v1 in the mid lane. He was, bleeding out resources like he was, dying like on his last breath. So it just kind of is what it is. Like, Quad needs to be better, but everybody else around him was good enough. I feel like Fly's form has definitely gone down since coming back to North America, as it basically does for every team in North America after MSI. I'm just hopeful they're going to be able to recapture it before they need to go to an international tournament. And then for LYON on the other side, it's the Saint game. Like, it's the Saint moment. Like, he ends up picking something like Aurora, getting mega fed in game 2, and just does not have the firepower to be able to carry. There are a lot of buzzwords being thrown around, hard stuck, he's trapped on LYON, he's the BDD of North America, like all of this stuff. Like, Elo held, I think, is the main buzzword that I think everybody's throwing out. I think that is kind of true. Like, there's a part of that sentence that's true. If you want to say that Saint is the best player on this team, I think that that's entirely fair. If you want to say that Saint is the best mid laner in North America and that it's ridiculous that he's on a team outside the top 4, that's where I'm going to start pushing back, because I've seen too many bad games from Saint to just sit here and tell you that he is like the best mid laner in North America and that there's no problems with him. He outplayed Quad in this series, and I think it would be absolutely fair to say that there is a world where Saint is a better player than Quad. I don't even think that's all that crazy in terms of the tape that we've seen, but pretending like he is not the reason that they lost a couple of games in the previous split is absolutely ridiculous, as I covered on this channel in the spring split when they were doing the round robin. And then, pretending like LYON would be a perfect team if they just had a better jungler and support, like if they just had a North American jungler and support, that's also a crazy statement. This team would still be hovering around 5th. I don't think they'd be better than Team Liquid or Shopify Rebellion in their current form if they just had non-Latin American players there, even if they are some of the weakest in their roles. So credit to Saint. I do want to give him some credit because I do think this was probably the best series he's played in North America, which is a really good sign. Like, it just in terms of raw gameplay and doing it against a top tier team, that was his problem last split, is he was beating up on the bad teams, and then when he had to go into the actual good teams, he really underperformed. This was a good sign that good style of play that he can go into some of the better teams in the league, and hopefully that continues to develop and he can start becoming the player that everybody wanted him to be. But I'm not willing to just completely hitch my wagon to him just yet in the same kind of way that everybody else is. This is not the BDD of North America. That feels like an insane statement to make. Henna is also a very overrated player for his impact. He's fine as an AD carry. He's around B-Voy level, I think, in terms of what he does as an ADC, but Masu is the better player, and I think that was clear in this series. You can give critiques to everybody else, but it's not really shocking that they lost. Lions is terrible. He's going to get done of the series here. He was so thoroughly outclassed by Busio in terms of the map movements and the engages. Both of them ended up playing playmakers, the Rakan and the Nico, respectively, throughout this series. And boy, did it feel like there was a difference in those two in terms of their production. So Lions certainly not a tier 1 caliber player. It's just really hard with the LLA roster restriction because there aren't a lot of good supports that could actually fill this spot. ODLAN is a little bit better. I think his macro is terrible. His decision making is just not good, but his hands are all right. And then Surdy, just didn't have the firepower to beat up on Bwipo. There were times where he looked okay, and there were times where he looked completely useless. It is what it is for a young player. But LYON pretty clearly in that number 5 spot. I think they're above the bottom 3, who just can't seem to find any success right now, but they're not as good as FlyQuest is. They're not really as good as the top 4, in my opinion. Now, maybe I end up being wrong on that. Maybe their win over Team Liquid does end up being something that's a little bit more substantial. They can carry that into the playoffs, but I'm not just forgetting that this team was bottom 2 last split, like literally, just a minute ago, like a month or 2 ago, they were a bottom 2 team in the entire league. I'm not going to forget that ended up happening. This team absolutely has weaknesses and has holes that can be exploited. And FlyQuest, they didn't even exploit them. They just kind of outplayed them in a lot of key areas. Saint was really good, but FlyQuest overall was better. But then moving on to our second day, the second half of week number 3, and we kicked it off with probably the series of the week in terms of expectations. It was Team Liquid taking on Cloud9, and Cloud9 is going to pick up the dominant 2-0. I think we expected more out of this series than out of LYON versus FlyQuest. I think basically everyone did, and yet once again, it's Cloud9 just proving that right now in the LTA, it's not a big 3, it's not a big 4, it's not a big 5, it's a big 2 in the LTA. Cloud9 and FlyQuest are really just so far above everybody else in terms of what their expectations are. If these aren't the 2 teams that go to Worlds, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised. You know what that means? That means one of them is going to miss Worlds for basically no reason. That's how it works here in North America. But let's talk about this game in particular. I mean, really, where to start is pretty easy because it's going to be most of the conversation. A wee bit of a top gap in this series overall for Cloud9. Thanatos is an absolute monster, and Impact is looking like it might be time. It might be donezo for Impact. It really has looked like this throughout all of this year. I've talked very vocally about how Impact has been terrible for Team Liquid so far. It felt like he was playing a little bit more stable across the summer split than he was across spring, but it does not feel like that anymore. This might be one of the largest top gaps I've seen in North America all year long, and that's certainly saying something because there's been some top lane performances that have been absolutely ridiculous, but Thanatos is just on a different level. I saw somebody compare him to Kana over on K-Corp. I think that's a pretty apt comparison in terms of how they play the game. Now, I would take Kana as a player over Thanatos. I want to make that clear. I love Thanatos. I think he's very, very good, but there are just a few more holes in his game than I think there are for Kana, who is just a ridiculous all-around player. Thanatos is just so dominant at being able to destroy people in these isolated lanes that nobody in the region can even try and go up against him. Like, there is no shot for anyone to actually be able to try and deal with him 1v1. I think a lot of people were talking last year about how Impact benefited a lot from the lane swap meta because he could just be this team fight monster and take over in the back half of the game. I don't think that's entirely fair to Impact. I think he did a good job at generating leads when he was isolated in 1v1s, but it is very clear that Impact in 1v1s this year is a nightmare, and I think if there's anyone who's benefited a lot from the lack of lane swaps or forcing a lot more of these 1v1 matchups, not that teams have not found a way to lane swap themselves, it's just a lot more common for top laners to actually be in a position where they have to lane now, it's Thanatos. Like, Thanatos has benefited so much because that really is his primary skill set, is being able to generate leads against other top laners, and boy did he do that in this series. The Rumble, the Aurora, get this guy on anything aggressive and he is going to massacre anyone in this region. There is not a top laner that has the mechanical skill to keep up with Thanatos. Maybe Bwipo, he's like the only one who I could even imagine having an opportunity, but even then, like, Thanatos was doing so much for Cloud9 in the playoffs against FlyQuest last split. I would predict it is going to be a big, difficult knockout for Cloud9. As long as he is playing this way, this team is going to be not beatable, not particularly, at least not easily beatable in the playoffs. So credit to Thanatos. Rest of the team was fine. I mean, they weren't exactly like catching the eye in the same kind of way, but Loki was definitely better than APA. Not that that should be particularly surprising. APA even gets his Ziggs in game number 2 and can't really do anything with it. I think Ziggs is in a great spot right now, and APA was not able to make the most of it. Sven and Vulcan are maybe the most consistent bot lane in the entire league, just in terms of how good they are on a game-to-game basis. Masu and Busio have gotten back. I think Masu has started playing phenomenal again going into the summer split, but Sven and Vulcan have been incredible throughout this entire year. Blabber, I think, is great on these engage facilitators. Again, give him proactivity, but don't make him carry the game. That's kind of the sweet spot for Blabber. It's just all clicking right now for Cloud9. There's nothing else that I can say about this team that I haven't already said. It just feels like they found their style. They found the way that they want to play the game, and they have the talent to back that up. And for Team Team Liquid, it's kind of disaster mode right now. You're ending the split at 1 and 2, under 500. That's really bad. And this team already collapsed in the playoffs last split, getting 4th, losing to Shopify. I think a lot of people did not expect that to happen. That looks a lot more like reality than it does like, you know, a fiction, at least at the current moment. This was a team that won the league in winter, that went to the first stand international tournament. I know people like to forget they went there because they were the first team eliminated, but like they won NA. They were the best team coming out of winter, and everything seems to have fallen apart. I'm not blaming this on UG, but I do think that part of it has to be said that Umti was contributing a lot at the beginning of spring for this team's success, and him coming out, I think, in the short term was a downgrade. Again, I think I expected this to be an upgrade in summer. It's not necessarily looked like that just yet, even though I still believe he's going to get there. APA and Impact had really bad series, and that's really going to bring some things back. APA, I don't think, played well on his signature champion. They built basically an entire comp around trying to make sure Ziggs could run the early game, and it did not work. But really, at the end of the day, if you have a top laner who's just getting slaughtered on the top side of the map, who's not contributing hardly anything to the game as a whole, who really only got kills from being donated kills throughout the back half of some of these games, then that you're not going to win, man. Impact is just not at the point where you can try and compete for a title right now. And he was playing like this, or maybe even a little bit better than this at the beginning of the year, and they still were able to compete. But Cloud9 and FlyQuest have figured things out, and it does not feel like Impact has gotten better at all throughout the year. If anything, he's gotten worse. And so the Scion, the Renekton, all of it was so exploitable by Cloud9, and the difference between Thanatos and Impact was just too big for Team Liquid to have a real shot at being able to win this game. LYON continues to be super good, and I think Core is actually having a really good year. It just doesn't matter. The bot lane's not able to 1v9 in the same kind of way. Honestly, this does at times remind me of a slightly worse version of the spring, spring split version of Team Liquid from last year that ended up like just looking like a disaster in the regular season before figuring things out. It kind of reminds me of that version of them, and if they've taken a step backwards in that regard, that is a nightmare for this team. And for Cloud9 on the other side, like I said, this team is really only in contention with FlyQuest at this point. Yes, Shopify are also 3-0, but that had more to do with, you know, actual matchups than it did with, you know, their specific talent level. There is a big 2 right now, and I think Cloud9 are more than expecting to be able to dominate the rest of the year. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in the LTA North, and it was a battle kind of for last place. It was a matchup between Dignitas and Disguised, where DSG, Disguised, is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. I feel pretty good about this because at the end of last week, I moved Disguised up to number 7 in my power rankings, moved Dig down to number 8 in terms of just how they had looked in their games, and obviously that ended up working out. I think a lot of people kind of saw that DSG had gotten better in summer. I think getting rid of Abadaga will do that. I think getting Rahel will do that. Shout out SK Gaming for essentially swapping those 2 players and then proceeding to go fast 10th in the LEC. Very funny to see an organization do that, but this was certainly not a series without throws. This felt like a matchup between 2 of the bottom teams in the LTA. That being said, probably the most entertaining series of the entire week, just in terms of actual raw gameplay. It wasn't good, but it was chaotic and it was quite fun to watch. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is obviously Rahel. It was never going to go to anyone else in this particular instance. I do want to give a big shout out to players like Darkwings and Huhi that I thought played really well throughout a lot of this series, but Rahel was the main character. He played Kaisa, Aphelios, Jinx in their 3 games, and it's very clear. It's just like, okay, we either get him fed or we lose. Like, that's kind of the game plan right now for DSG, and I honestly don't hate that game plan. He is the best player on this team by a large margin, especially when you're talking raw mechanics, and I think if you are going to hitch your wagon to a player on this roster, it should definitely be him. So getting to play hyper carries in a meta where hyper carries are significantly better than they have been recently, I think it makes a lot of sense. The Kaisa looked great in game 1. The Jinx was basically unstoppable by the end of game number 3. Really great stuff overall, and Rahel I still think has the potential to make a gigantic impact at this level. I think he has the mechanics to be a top 1 or 2 AD carry in North America. Like, he can be up there with LYON and Masu and, you know, Sven in terms of like the production that he's putting down on the Rift. I just think it's going to be difficult to do it on DSG in particular because he doesn't really have the support system, but he is a very good player, a top 4 AD carry in my opinion in the entire league right now. Darkwings I thought just played his best series so far as a pro, or I guess as a tier 1 pro is more so what I mean to say. That's nice. That's good timing. Kana is not exactly the least efficient player in the entire universe. It's not like he's phenomenal, but he's a good enough player. He's been to Worlds, and he's had success at Worlds in the past for Darkwings to kind of just be the better mid laner in a series like this, play things like Malzahar and Ziggs, and really try to stabilize in the mid lane. I think it makes a lot of sense for this team to really just put the onus elsewhere and just allow him to play some of these mages that he's gotten so good at over the course of his career. He just played easily his best series of the split. He has been terrible for DSG, but leave it to Isles to kind of out-terrible He in a matchup between the two bottom teams. Castle was fine. XU was really the only player on DSG that was actively running it. What a terrible game 2 from XU on the Wukong. He's just not been very good at all in Tier 1. Like, there's really not even a lot else to say on that front in that regard. I just don't really believe that XU is going to be the kind of player that succeeds right now. At this level, he's not really shown anything, but it was enough for DSG to be able to win, and quite frankly, they did salvage his mental quite a bit in game number 3. Still made one of the funniest Jarvan plays you'll ever see. Sometimes you just feel yourself too much, and you dive in and instantly die, but it is what it is. The team still won. You don't have to worry about it too much there in game number 3, but DSG picking up the win, and for Dignitas, I think it's pretty clear this is the worst team in North America right now, at least in Tier 1. It looks terrible for Dignitas. It feels like this roster has completely caved in. A lot of the positives that we were seeing from some of the long-standing players are just gone. Shaden has not been looking nearly the player he was in spring, quite frankly, in summer, and they already weren't looking good in spring, but Shaden was the one bright spot on this team, and it just doesn't feel like that is there anymore. I will say credit to the Olaf game in game 2. Olaf has been finding a lot of success globally when he is played. Very small play rate, very high win rate. It's a pretty fun champ. You know, we'll see if he ends up growing into something that's a little bit more viable as the year goes along, because I think he actually has a pretty good niche in the meta right now with so many setup junglers kind of coming through. He's one of the better carry junglers right now, in my opinion. So, you know, credit to Shaden for pulling him out, but the Xin Zhao, the Trundle, it didn't necessarily work out. I will say the same thing for Kana in the mid lane. His KDA is fine, and I think generally his impact on these games were fine, but Darkwings was the better mid laner, and I think that is definitely a sign. Photon was also fine on the top side. Not necessarily going to blame him. He's kind of a worse version of Thanatos in the fact that he's just so good in lane 1v1, and he doesn't really know what he's supposed to be doing outside of that, but he still is a valuable player. I think Photon and Rahel, the new additions to their individual teams, both come into a pretty similar circumstance where they kind of need to 1v9. It's just a lot easier to do that as an AD carry than it is to do that as a top laner, but the bot lane was not good enough here. Tomo had a couple of moments, but Isles was sprinting it in this series. If I didn't know any better, I would think he got paid off, because this was genuinely one of those games where it's just like one of these series just in general, but specifically on the Bard in game 3 where it's like, man, what are you doing? Leave that to Busio. That shit is not working out for you. So Isles not looking great, playing his worst series of the entire split. He's getting dud of the series, obviously, for this performance. You know, I've defended Isles in the past because I don't think he's like a terrible support. I just think he's slightly below average at basically every part of the role. Now, at times that could be like top 5-ish in the league because so many supports are quite bad. And I think there was a time where he was a very good 2v2 player, like an early game player in the support role. That's not really there anymore. And I think specifically with the meta going to playmakers, things like Nico and Bard and Rakan and, you know, all of that stuff, I don't think he really fits into that playstyle all that well. And I think we are seeing that at the current moment. But really the big takeaway here is that Dignitas is the worst team in the LTA and DSG is better than them. And they honestly, with this win, have a pretty good shot of being better than them moving forward because the standings are not what you think they would be. This win gets DSG all the way up to 5th in the standings in terms of how things break down. So very much a big win for Disguised and one that I think will come back to really pay dividends. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA North week number 3 overview and analysis video, and that's going to do it for the kind of regular season in the LTA North. Crazy that we are already done with it. Feels kind of ridiculous, all things considered, but before we jump into the playoff bracket and kind of preview how that ends up breaking down, let's go ahead and jump into my player of the week and my dud of the week to tie everything up for this week number 3. Player of the week should not be surprising to anybody. It's going to Thanatos, the top laner for Cloud9. This guy continues to absolutely dominate everybody that he's going up against. He is the best top laner in North America, and it's not particularly close. He torched them on Rumble, he obliterated them on Aurora, and I love seeing this team have the confidence to pick things like Aurora for top lane here because he can just break games wide open. I think those kinds of drafts are things that Cloud9 really is the only team in North America that has true access to, because I think even a team like FlyQuest really struggles when they have to play through Bwipo entirely. They like to put him on a tank and play through Masu and get him resources and allow Bwipo to be useful basically no matter what in those team fights. So Thanatos just opens up this completely different option for Cloud9, and I really think it benefits them a lot. So Thanatos was the easy choice for player of the week here. Then my honorable mentions, my runner-ups, if you will, Rahel, the AD carry for Disguised, big win for Disguised, and we'll talk about that when we get to the playoff bracket, but Rahel really was the driving force for that. And then Palafox, the mid laner here for Shopify Rebellion. It felt like he also played really well across his series here, and he is very much back into form. I think these were the 3 best players in the league across this week, but dud of the week, honestly, to me, pretty easy. It's going to Impact, the top laner for Team Liquid. I think there's a reasonable place to put Isles here, and honestly, I'm not going to fight back too much if you want to put Isles as dud of the week, but man, Impact is just terrible. Like, this guy is starting to get absolutely grilled in the 1v1. He cannot even really survive at that level anymore, especially against the top tier top laners at this level, but even against like the mid tier top laners, he's struggled a lot. So Impact is really starting to concern me, so much so that, you know, in their matchup against Cloud9, he really was the reason that they ended up not having any pressure. So Impact is going to be dud of the week, and Thanatos, who beat him, is going to get player of the week, but that's going to do it for the regular season. Typically, I would end the video here, but we've got one more thing to talk about, and that is the playoff bracket, the elimination phase, I guess technically, of the regular season, because this is pre, like, Worlds qualifying, LTA, cross-conference, all of that stuff. This is specifically the playoffs to qualify for that cross-conference matchup, and the way that this is sorted, the top 4 teams in terms of regular season record are immediately slotted into upper bracket round 2, a qualification series, essentially, you know, because all you have to do is make top 3 in order to go on to the cross-conference matchup. So, really important stuff for Cloud9, Shopify Rebellion, FlyQuest, and Team Liquid, who are all competing to move on to that next stage. Of course, they want to win. They want to generate that momentum. They want to get a better seed going into cross-conference, but really all you need to do is win one series from the point you're at in upper round 2, and you will be going to that next round. As for the bottom 4 teams, they are slotted into lower bracket round number 1 immediately, and they get matchups, obviously, depending on their seeding, but it becomes a bit easier or a bit harder for specific teams because of that and because of who they might have to face in those losing matchups. So we can quickly go ahead and preview what exactly happened and why teams are sitting in the way that they are and who they're facing in round 1 and all of that good stuff. Cloud9 taking on Shopify Rebellion, the 2 versus 3 seed matchup. Unfortunately for Shopify, Cloud9 is one of the top 2 teams. I would expect them to pretty cleanly be able to pick up this win just like they did towards the end of last split when Shopify was white hot coming into the playoff matchup. Cloud9 dismantled them really efficiently. It wasn't particularly close. No real reason to think it's going to go a different way. And then a budding rivalry, I guess not so much a budding rivalry, but a true rivalry here in the LTA as we get FlyQuest taking on Team Liquid in this round, and this is where I think Fly's consistency and their success really pays off for them. If Team Liquid was going up against Cloud9, I think that there actually could be a discussion about whether or not C9 was in a little bit of trouble in particular in this instance. With Team Liquid, they just seem so off kilter, and FlyQuest is way too consistent. Until this team proves that they have the bone to step up and really perform in these big moments, it's hard to really count on them. So I have FlyQuest and Cloud9 moving on. Big surprise, you know, something nobody else is going to have. But jokes aside, moving down to the lower part of the bracket, we've got the 5 versus 8 matchup, which somehow is Disguised versus Dignitas, a rematch of the match we just talked about at the end of the week. Disguised, with their win, got all the way up to the 5th seed because of just how terrible the bottom of the LTA has been, and quite frankly, I think it has saved quite a bit for them because they win this matchup almost certainly. They already proved they were the better of these 2 teams. I don't think there's any reason to believe that they are not favorites going into their matchup against Dignitas, and DSG winning a playoff series at all, even if it means nothing going into likely like a Team Liquid or something like that in the next round, it's still pretty massive for them to be able to pick up that win, and it's pretty cool, all things considered. And then the 6 versus 7 matchup, LYON versus 100 Thieves. This is way more interesting because on paper, there is no reason that 100 Thieves should not be able to beat a team like LYON. I think especially LYON has a terrible matchup into 100 Thieves because when you look at what LYON does at a high level, it's just Saint. It's their mid lane that needs to be able to carry the game, but 100 Thieves have maybe the most talented mid laner in the entire region, and so matchup-wise, it's hard for me to bet against 100 Thieves, and in fact, I'm going to put my foot down. I actually think 100 Thieves win this series despite expectations. I think LYON has a good chance of making me look like an idiot here, but I have to go for something a bit off-kilter, or else I'm just going, you know, chalk for every pick, and that's very boring. So my predictions for these 4 series, I have Cloud9, FlyQuest, Disguised, and 100 Thieves picking up wins across these 4. Let me know if you agree or disagree with those takes down in the comment section below, but that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit subscribe. We're covering every single series that happens in the LTA for the rest of the year. That includes the LTA North here, and then of course the cross conference that ends up qualifying for Worlds as well. So You'll want to stick around for all that stuff, but we also cover all 3 of the other major regions, so LEC, LCK, and LPL. We cover the NACL. We just put out a video yesterday on the last regular season week of the NACL where we're previewing the playoffs, in that as well, so, tune in for that. And we're covering the LPL through LPL English. I've been casting for LPL English. Links to that will be in the description, the YouTube, the Twitch, all of that. Follow, subscribe if you are interested in catching me commentate some live League of Legends, but with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all